Hello everyone, welcome to a Second Thoughts overview of Malekith of Negorond. I played through the initial turns and observed the victory conditions, starting location, diplomacy, mechanics, buildings, units, etc. These are my conclusions regarding how the faction plays out in general. In the later parts of the video I'll show you what army compositions I would do and why. As always, this is how I typically approach my campaigns, what I check while making my plans of conquest. It should not be considered a fully in-depth guide with everything, but will have notions that will help you out certainly. Now without any further business, let's play with Malekith of the Dark Elves. As for the victory conditions, Malekith has quite lengthy ones. For the short campaign, you need to destroy Etain. It's pretty far away, actually. Look at this. I mean, it's right there in Ulthuan, yeah, but it takes quite some time to get there. At least safely, and ensuring that your provinces don't have any issue. You know, you kind of need like to build up in two places at the same time, or it will take quite some time. You also need to control Lothern itself. That's pretty basically, it's tied to the objective of destroying Etain for sure. And you need to occupy Lutrazer Sec 30 different settlements. Should we achieve this, +3 recruit rank for all armies, not bad, ensuring that we always get some good recruits and good quality units overall. For the long campaign, you need the short victory conditions to occupy Lutrazer Sec 75 different settlements and to control the Shrine of Cain. Rather somewhat easier than actually controlling Etain. Now, the biggest part of this is that you need to destroy nearly all of the High Elves, including the Order of Lore Masters, which is so far away. It's southern Chaos Wastes nearly, and also the Knights of Caledor, which is right here. So if they get big, then it's a problem. If they're like with one settlement or two, maybe you can just send an expedition there to finish them off, but it's quite a large objective. I really don't understand this, but okay, I guess it's fine. For long victory, income from slaves +15%. That's good to ensure that you'll be, going to into that domination victory if you wish, with a little bit more income and ease. So that's definitely good. Still a very lengthy campaign overall. Definitely. He's the Witch King of Naggaroth, so he has +50% allegiance points gained from alliances with Dark Elves and some diplomatic relations. So all of this synergizes well, so if you get some good alliances with some Dark Elves, they'll also provide you some allegiance points extra so that you can do something with that alliance. Now, the loyalty +2 for new recruits just ensures that you don't get too much impact from that mechanic, and the upkeep reduction is great. Blackout of Nagorond, you'll probably have a few of them in your armies, or in all of your armies. Good anti-large unit and armor piercing. And for the Dread Spears, Bleak Swords and Dark Shards, they'll mostly comprise your initial armies, so that is also really good. A good buff both for the initial part of the game and the early game and the late game. In terms of climate, they do have quite a lot of trouble in that. Most unpleasant, most uninhabitable. Let me show you the consequences here. And in addition to those consequences, just overall, look at how much yellow there is. Look at this part. I can actually fit in almost everywhere here. It's just yellow or red, not habitable climate at all. So that'll cause some troubles if you wish to go into that domination campaign. It's up to you, of course, but always note these slight issues. Don't mind this is just copy pasted from other ones. So they do have unpleasant climate in mountain, but they're actually frozen. For them it's pleasant, but still in essence they will have a lot of issues trying to go into that domination campaign for certain. Now, Malekith does have somewhat of an easy starting location, but just a 2-settlement initial starting province. Now, there's a neighbor 4 starting province that will probably become one of your main unit producers, and army producers, of course. Typical expansion should clear out the north if possible, and only then proceed with the south. However, you may always wish to go directly for the objectives, for the victory objectives, although a continuous defense versus Chaos to the north and Norska might prove actually quite challenging. Now, your typical enemies will be Chaos, including Norska, Dwarves, and later High Elves and Wood Elves for certain. You also will have to face probably against the Lizard Man, since Elves are quite the evil faction in itself, of course. They're basically the evil faction. As for diplomacy, we'll have plenty of enemies and just a few potential allies. Most of them will probably be Dark Elves. However, some options for Chaos and Norska to become allies are still there, especially if you give them a province, a settlement, sorry. Although be wary of that route. They may always just turn on you later on. Now, Vampire Coast is something that I would love to try. It's probably one of the best ideas for outposts, but do not expect it to be easy. Still, if it is possible, try to secure an alliance and get their artillery pieces and deck gunners for some powerful combinations. A note should be made that you already start with a military alliance with Hag Grief, with Malice Dark Blade. That may either prove good for you or bad if it turns out to lead you into way too many battles. As I was explaining in terms of outposts, if you manage to get one for the Vampire Coast, then just ensure that you get their basically their top missile units, such as the deck gunners, Carronades mortars, and even some Colossus if you wish. In terms of mechanics, let's start with the rights. You have 4 of them. One of them is just to obtain the possibility of recruiting a Black Ark in any port settlement. This helps out to ensure that you basically have a sea settlement, okay? And it can also carry a lord. It can also ensure that you have some army abilities nearby. Black Ark in itself is an amazing mechanic. As soon as you recruit one, you'll see exactly what it is all about. Now, in terms of the other ones, you have one for mostly magic and for experiences for sorcerers, and also hero action success chase plus 40%. This is cool for multiplayer. Don't be caught on this, actually. Now, Sacrifice to Cain. It also basically gives you more income from post-battles, more casualty replenishment rate. This is excellent if you're fighting a lot. Just put this up and you'll be fighting much better in a war of attrition. It also gives you this army ability, in essence an explosion that helps a lot. Now, this last sacrifice, it's important, you know, the chance to gain 2 loyalty. This is always cool if you're suffering from that issue, and also control +8 all provinces. This is in general quite good to ensure that you don't get any rebellions going. Now, in terms of loyalty, let me speak briefly regarding that. So you have a starting loyalty, and of course it will improve during the campaign or decrease depending on how you do. And in essence, you have to pay attention to this, because 0, if it reaches 0, they'll rebel, they'll take their army with them, form a new faction. So you always have these loyalty issues with the Dark Elves. Now, of course, with Malekith, it's improved because he gives +2 to all of them. So that is something that you still should have in mind. So, for instance, between these 2 lords, get the one with more loyalty despite all the conditions that we see here. Well, maybe I'll still get that one, you see, but that's the sort of decision making that you need to do, aware of why you're doing it. Let's actually recruit, and I'll show you one other thing, which is the other mechanic, one of the best ones actually in the game, honestly, for me. The Name of Power. Once you reach level 10 with any lord, they will be able to choose a Name of Power. This can improve either the faction or the lord or their army. I'll show you all the examples in the end of near the army compositions video, but this is mainly what can cause you to have a complete shift in what you're doing, both in the campaign and both in army compositions with that specific lord. So pay really good attention to these ones. Now, speaking of the most important mechanic, basically, the slave mechanic. There's a lot of things that are caused by slaves. It allows you to purchase rights, as you've seen there. It costs some slaves there. And it also allows you to purchase dictats. Not purchase, to engage in dictats. So these are kind of like similar to edicts. They just lasts 5 turns in this case. And look at that, 5 turns, control plus 20, that's really cool. It helps if you're having issues with a specific province. And then you also have this to generate some gold and some control, and you also have the slave drive, which is some growth and construction cost reduction for all buildings. So in essence, just a nice addition for you to use slaves to benefit, of course, from that mechanic. Slaves themselves, it's not showing up here, but the more slaves you have, the more you get a benefit, some nice buffs that you can get, and such as for reduced costs and some more income from the slaves as well. That's really cool. It's not as it used to be in Warhammer 2. People are kind of divided into that. I actually like it, but it's still quite simplified. So I like it because it's simplified, but still some people dislike it. It's of course everyone to their own opinion. As for province edicts, they're rather different than the typical set. You have a basic control edict, some income from all buildings, and then we have something with the negative. So income from post-battle loot faction-wide, but minus 50% slaves per turn. And then recruit rank and weapon strength for armies in the province. This can quickly turn out to be an issue if you forget about that. So it's one of the mechanics that you always need to be aware of when playing the Dark Elves. Always double check your edicts in case you're just reducing your slaves per turn without being necessary. We also have the Read Dark Portents. This is basically a jack of all trades one. Less enemy hero action success chance, more ambush success chance for you, and chance of intercepting your armies in underway, beast paths, or world routes. You also have the one that I have here, which is more growth at the cost of 50 slaves per turn, and more income from slaves. So overall, a nice addition to how you have to manage the slaves. It just forces you to keep on fighting, keep on generating slaves for this faction. And yeah, it's one of the interesting parts, I guess. Now, in terms of army stances, you have quite some basics. So the channeling, but with some changes. So the channeling does not only provide windows of magic, also movement campaign range, it needs 10%, but it also enables replenishment in foreign territory, which is rather interesting. You'll want to do this to replenish. Raiding, for instance, gets you it's the one that gives you immune to attrition. You don't have an in-camp basically, so you need to be in raiding in order to be immune to attrition, and of course when raiding you also gain slaves based on the strength of the army. For ambush you need 25%. By the way, for raiding you only need 25%. It's different than others. For ambush you need 25% as well, and then you have the typical forced march. So overall you're missing the in-camp. In general, channeling will be your in-camp idea just because of the replenishment, but notice that you do not have any specific global recruitment. Why? Because the sort of global recruitment is taken by the black arcs. So you have black arcs nearby. If a lord from a black arc is here, then you'll be able to recruit units from that black arc from the buildings that you have generated there. Negarond itself has 4 special buildings, including the port. Notice the minus 80 slaves per turn. Be careful with the amount of ports that you have because of this. Now, one is regarding Blackguards of Negarond, very good building to have, and the other one is basically a faction-wide bonuses availability. Now, in terms of the stonemasons, of course, minus construction cost is all nice. You may often forego this to other buildings in the late game, of course. For full military province, you need 7 buildings. That's quite a lot. However, the good side is that 3 of them can actually be built in minus settlements. And not only that, but they also have perfect unit types. Shades are great units overall. You also have Dark Shards, some Black Arc Corsairs, some Sisters of the Slaughter, even an artillery piece, and some cavalry, Doomfire Warlocks and Dark Rider Shields. So in essence, you can always do quite a lot with just the tier 3 units, and I'm not even counting with the Scourge Runners and the Bloodwrack Medusas there. As for infrastructure, you have a growth plus added faction slave capacity and income from slaves building. You also have a basic income building with the downside of diminishing the amount of slaves. This is quite an issue here with lots of things counting on slaves and wrecking your slave count. So it forces you to always be fighting. You also have a control building that benefits from a higher number of slaves. It just needs to be higher than 100, by the way. It's not that difficult to have that. But it needs to be at the start of the turn. So you always need to have some spare slaves left over, basically. And you also have the slave market, which gives you slaves per turn. The only building that does so, I believe. And -4 controls. So, in addition, we do have a jack of all trades, in essence. We do have a building for campaign movement range, truth, income from trade tariffs, less slave costs for dictates, and income from all buildings. Pretty good options in terms of the infrastructure, if too much focused on the slave mechanic. In terms of research, it is mighty powerful for the Dark Elves. Plenty of buffs for units and anything else in terms of campaign as well. Such as growth, for instance, casualties, income from ports, control, and it has a lot up until the end of reaching here some wards, say from Doomfire Warlocks, some corruption, income from settlement buildings. So it's one of the most active research lines because of from any faction, because it does count really well in the end. It will turn your units really powerful by the end. As for skills, as always, you have your Legendary Lord skills. The yellow line, in this case it's divided between the typical melee part of it and the magic part of it, because this Malekith is both, in essence, really great lord, really powerful, both in melee and casting. And you have the red line skills and the blue line skills. Starting with Malekith, he can be more of a campaign focus, such as getting income from slaves, some more diplomatic relations, control for province, growth, etc. These sort of buffs, as well as the war leader here. So you have to choose, they're mutually exclusive. So he can get some better army abilities, basically, you know, getting it to replenish easily, some lord recruit rank, it's always nice, some magic drop chance and income from post battle. So it's up to you to choose. It will be difficult to select from only 50 all of these wonderful buffs for him, but I'm sure you can. In terms of the red line, they have interesting early game compositions to mid game compositions, basically buffing everything from the tier 3 and below units here, for instance. Raid leader also has for shade and cavalry, so that's also nice. And slaughter lord also buffs mostly of the elite units. Now, in terms of the blue line, special attention for the casualties captured. This may prove worthwhile due to the slave economy, and also for your less upkeep and replenishment rate here, as well as less even upkeep on the renowned and feared, one of the better ones to have there. A note on some of the specific lords, namely the Beastmasters. Let me show here. So yeah, the Beastmasters, I'm not going to show them here, I'll show it later on, but they do have some buffs, specifically for some monsters, including a Cold One, and they are excellent to build up some armies focused on those creatures. Now, in terms of the schools of magic, they're excellent to deal out damage. This army is all about dealing a lot of damage really fast. And they're rather weak, but it's like, if I had to define it, it's the glass cannon army, guys. They'll do out a lot of damage and suffer a lot of damage as well. But still, that's what we love about that. Now, finally, in terms of the names of power, let me show you the list. Now, here we go. You have divided into aristocratic here, revered, and martial. Sorry, because it needed to be here because it wouldn't fit. Now, the good part of this is how they can change significantly a campaign or even an army composition alone. Okay, such as having a lord with regeneration, that can change things, and other stuff as that, or having an army that is immune to attrition, that sort of idea, or having some faction-wide additional trade or resources, or income from trade, or income from ports, if not mistaken. There's one that gives that. Cannot find it right now, but fine. Now, in terms of the ones that people typically get is for the army, special note for Barb Storm, for any missile focused army, plus range, plus missile strength, plus ammunition, everything that you want for that. You also have Shadow Dart, very often used because it gives plus 35% range to shades, which makes them suddenly one of the most overpowered units in the game. And the Grey Vanquisher, also nice because it also buffs shades and dark riders. Of course, these are all mutually exclusive, so you can only pick one, and you will have at random a choice between two. So it gives this replay value, as in you may get the luck of getting one that you really love, or, well, you can always save scum to get that. But if you go through and just catch the first one that finds, try to make it something out of it. Try to make an army composition or a strategy around that. That's what I love about these Names of Power, because it allows such variety in the overall gameplay. In terms of the heroes that you get, special note to some of them. For instance, the Master is a good melee hero, but the Death Hag gives you replenishment for your troops, so this is one of the factions that has better replenishment than anyone else. The Knight Assassin does increase the slave income, so always nice to have a few of them in your most profitable provinces. And you also have the Sorceress, giving some scouting, some spread control if you wish. So a special note then for the Death Hag, I always like to have some good replenishment. That allows me to continue with the campaign and the conquest. So yeah, that'll be it. As for the red line skills for the Dark Elves, here you have them with all units that they respectively buff. Just a note here on the raid leader that also buffs shades and dark riders, so the early cavalry that you have, and then Doomfire warlocks. They're pretty effective cavalry as well. The Scourge Runner, these units definitely fit into any elite army as well sometimes, so it's a very nice addition there. Most of the time this is what happens, and it's happening here. So you have one for the monsters, one for the elite cav, one for the elite infantry, one for the lower quality infantry basically, but there's a couple of synergies that you can use here. Now let me show you for Malekith. He doesn't buff anyone in particular, which means that it's one of the lords that you can actually build up the way you kinda want easily. Of course you can always do that, but there's nothing specific about them that will imply using one unit or another. So here's just one with some elite infantry, some cavalry. They're basically just for a hammer and anvil style of play. This one with more monsters, maybe more focused on the frontline idea. Yeah, you can see the red line skills points allocation that it would cost. And also for basic armies, this would be what I would intend to do perhaps on not just too much for a late game army, but also for a early to mid game army, you know. Then later you can always use this or a style of this combination to get as a cleanup army, you know. This is probably one of the standards that I would use. Lots of armor piercing, if not mistaken. Every single unit, yep, every single unit here is armor piercing, so that's one of the things about this faction. No armor piercing lacking, trust me. They will always have it. And over here it's two combinations just basically for the Beastmaster. Why? Because he has all these buffs that he can get for the basically cold ones, basically most of the monsters. So here's some interesting ideas around that. Of course, for instance, special note to this one, it costs only 10 skill points because mostly it's just infantry and monsters really, but still quite a formidable army. Enough anti-large armor piercing there, some infantry to hold the line. So yeah, that's the sort of idea here. So in terms of a faction overview, final conclusions. The slave mechanic, it kind of generates everything for you. So it leads you into most decisions. You're encouraged to fight, pillage, raid, etc. I would play them actually as pirates. Just keep rampaging over distant shorelines, maybe just harassing the High Elves with one army, you know, just going around the shoreline, or two armies maybe, you know, just send someone there. And then, while you solidify, of course, your initial position slowly and benefit from all that income. The overall synergy of the army is interesting. Very few weaknesses, a strong emphasis on damage. You always have tons of armor piercing. It does like a little bit of health. So to summarize, army has great infantry, great missiles, great cavalry, although expensive, great single entity monsters, good flyers, an emphasis, like I said, on armor piercing and somewhat reduced health. Now replenishment is good, so your conquests may continue for quite some time without having to halt. I believe that it is now a good time for you to catch up and play with Mr. Malekith.